Even though it has been a while since I worked at the CDC as a pharmacist, I still get a lot of questions from pharmacy students and fellow pharmacists about that experience, about how I got into public health, what my time at the CDC was like, suggestions for fellow pharmacists who might want to work in public health or specifically at the CDC. And so I thought it might be helpful to use one of our Health Writing Wednesdays sessions to talk more deeply about um, a few reflections from my time spent at the CDC and how that impacted my writing career moving forward. I think it'll be really important for you to hear kind of my favorite parts about working at the CDC because it'll allow you to apply some of that information to your own interests in medical writing and health writing. So, if we haven't connected before, my name is Megan Freeland. I'm a public health pharmacist by trade, but I work as a health communication specialist, a health content strategist through my company, Stockrose Creative. And through my program, Health Professionals to Health Writers, I teach fellow pharmacists and other healthcare professionals how to replace a portion of their income through freelance health content writing. Now, since high school, I knew that I wanted to work in public health, even though I did not have the strongest understanding of what public health really was. I chose to attend pharmacy school instead for a multitude of reasons, rather than pursuing an MPH at the time. But my intention was always the same. My intention in going into pharmacy was to figure out how to use that degree, use that knowledge, use that background, and apply it to public health. So even though I went into pharmacy, my goal was still to apply what I was learning through pharmacy to a public health setting. And working at the CDC was my dream job. I attended Emory University for undergrad, which is right next door to the CDC. I had also visited the CDC during a high school field trip where we toured both Emory and the CDC. And at that time in the ninth grade is exactly when I decided I was going to Emory for college and I was going to work at the CDC. And I did that. I worked at the CDC as a fellow and as a contractor on three separate occasions. And I'll talk more about those specific experiences later because they directly relate to medical and health writing. But across those experiences, I took away so much rich knowledge that I don't imagine I would have gained elsewhere, or at least not in the way that I did. And so those are kind of the reflections that I want to share with you today. Whether or not you work in public health, they're going to be relevant to your professional trajectory, and especially if you're interested in medical or health writing. So let's get down to my favorite parts. Number one, the absolute best thing about working at the CDC for me was just being surrounded by greatness and brilliance on a on an hourly basis. Everywhere you went, you just knew that you were in the presence of people who were really bright, people who were really inquisitive, people who were using their God-given gifts and talents to advance public health and literally make the world a better place. Um, there was so much sharing of ideas, of learnings, of best practices through presentations and conferences and um, different types of opportunities to learn from other people that you would see, would maybe pass through along the hallways, but maybe didn't work with directly because the CDC is such a large organization and because public health in general is such a vast field. It's easy to get siloed and it's easy to get very deep in the work that you're doing, but not really realize what's going on in some of those other areas. And so there was never a shortage of opportunities to learn something new, to that you didn't know about before and that might be applicable to some of the things that you are working on. So maybe there's transferable knowledge, transferable information that one group is operating with that your group isn't operating with, but you can learn something from them and figure out how to improve, what your group is doing. And there was just always um, something to learn and work to be inspired by and people to be inspired by. And so that for me was as a person who really extracts a lot of energy from my surroundings and from the people and the things that are around me, just physically being in space with others in the CDC family and community, and also intellectually being able to learn from all of those other people is an irreplicable experience for me. So that was one of my favorite parts. My second favorite part was having the opportunity to learn about so many different types of medical and health writing in that space. And this is something that I probably would not have been able to verbalize when I was there. It's something that is more noticeable to me in hindsight as a person who has continued their professional trajectory in medical and health writing and learned more about the different types. So now looking back on that experience, on the 3 separate times I was at the CDC, I'm able to realize just how much of my experience and expertise in relation to medical and health writing is because of my experiences there. So I've talked about this in other videos, but in case you haven't heard me talk about it, the 3 times that I was at the CDC were one for a summer fellowship while I was in pharmacy school. The fellowship that I completed was called the Ferguson Fellowship. And during that fellowship, which was, like I said, just a summer, maybe 8 or 9 weeks, the work that I did during that time was really focused on scientific publications, so a manuscript writing, which involved a lot of literature searches. So that was the kind of medical writing that I was most deeply exposed to in that particular experience. A couple of years later, I was back at the CDC doing an ORISE fellowship in health communications, specifically for one of the units that dealt with antimicrobial stewardship and antimicrobial resistance. And in that particular situation, I was mostly focused on health communications and a little bit of health content writing, although I didn't have a name for it at the time. I would not have been able to describe it that way. But it's really the first time that I got to experience translating scientific information from a clinical, scientific, medical audience to a lay audience. And that is when I fell in love with that whole translation process and really writing for an audience of consumers and lay people. And then the last experience that I had at the CDC was between about 2017 and 18, or maybe 2016 and 17, in regulatory affairs. And that is where I gained a lot of deep experience with regulatory writing. And there was also some drug information involved in that particular experience. So if I'm looking back over the entire trajectory of my experiences at the CDC, I got experience in at least 4 to 5 different types of medical and health writing just by being there. And I don't know of many places where I could have gotten that same breadth of experience um, in one organization. I think large organizations, that's one of the benefits, is that you have a way to kind of explore um, different silos or different areas without necessarily needing to go to another company. But for me, having spent a good chunk of my professional years at the CDC, being able to experience all of those different types of writing and actually get deep practice in them was invaluable, because a lot of them I had no experience in until I was actually doing that type of health writing. So like health communications, for example, while I was qualified to do it, it was really my past experiences in other types of medical writing that qualified me to be able to do health communications. Same thing with regulatory writing. Whereas I hadn't done it before explicitly, my previous experiences in health communications and drug information, medical information, and all the other types of medical writing qualified me to be able to fill that role of regulatory writer. So it really underscores one of my favorite aspects of medical and health writing, which are that a lot of those skills build upon each other. And although they are not all equal, although the different types of medical and health writing require different skill sets, there are some commonalities. And because of those commonalities, those skill sets are able to be applied to different types of medical and health writing opportunities. So it's like the more experience you get, the better qualified you are for other types of medical and health writing experiences. And being able to learn about so many different types and practice so many types while at the CDC was really invaluable for the rest of my career. And lastly, the third favorite part that came up in my reflections was the fact that because I had all of those experiences in different types of medical and health writing there, I was able to learn from them. I was able to enhance different skills that I hadn't necessarily developed before or even thought about before, to be completely honest. And on the flip side, I was also able to see some of the gaps and some of the areas of improvement um, within health content at large. And so, trying to give a concrete example, one of the frustrating parts about being any type of writer, is that there's an extensive review process. You don't just write stuff and then it's there for someone to read. Oftentimes, whatever you wrote is going to be reviewed and analyzed and changed and edited by not just one person, but oftentimes a whole string of people. And obviously, if we're talking about, a large public health agency, federal agency, there is a substantial and highly bureaucratic review process. And so, one of the things that I've spoken about before that could be frustrating with any review process, but especially if we're thinking about kind of the confines of, what a federal agency has to do and the types of audiences and communities that a federal agency is designed to serve. That when it comes to making health content that is as relevant as possible for specific communities, that can be challenging because that agency has to serve all communities. And so for me, I noticed that there were lots of situations where some of the personality, some of the relevancy that was really a part of things, written communications that people would draft, would often be extracted or watered down through that lengthy review process. And what you would see as the end product wouldn't be wrong or incorrect, but it would cause you to wonder whether this end product is as relevant as possible for the end user. And that was something that frustrated me and caused me to it frustrated me, but also inspired me to think about ways to improve that and think about ways to make sure that the health content that was being created wasn't just accurate, but was also engaging and also relevant and also entertaining and all of the things that that people actually need to be able to care, right? Because as healthcare professionals, as healthcare providers, we inherently care. Like, we're nerds when it comes to science stuff. We're interested in that. That's what we chose to do. It's what we chose to dedicate our lives to. That's not necessarily the case for other people. They're not just inherently interested in the latest updates on, diabetes management or the latest continuous glucose monitoring systems. That's not recreational or inherently interesting for lay people in the way that it is for us. So it is important to not just think about getting information to people. It's also important to think about how it is presented to people and whether it's presented in a way that makes it important, that makes it valuable, that makes it interesting, that makes it relevant, because only then will it be actionable. Someone is not going to act on the advice or the recommendations that they're receiving if they don't get past the point of actually like seeing what the recommendations and what the advice is. And the only way to do that is to make it interesting for them and to make it relevant to them. So anyway, seeing those gaps inspired me to create my own health content, which is exactly what led me to start my blog. I thought about the fact that lots of my family members, friends would always ask me pharmacy related questions, and they will oftentimes be the same questions. So I figured, well, this might be a nice opportunity to practice creating content that's relevant to specific communities and that's interesting for them and engaging for them and entertaining to them, and also helps them answer a health question or solve a health problem, which is the essence of what health content writing does. And so I started a blog. And that's what unintentionally led into my foray into freelance health content writing, which is why the fact that I started that blog was so important. But I would not have done that had I not been exposed to everything that I just talked about while working as a pharmacist and really a communications specialist, I guess, if you will, at the CDC. So, key takeaways. Number one, it's important to surround yourself with people who inspire you. Especially if you're a person who, like me, who extracts energy from the environment, from the people and the things that are around me. If you're a person like that, it's really important to surround yourself with people who inspire you to think bigger, to dream bigger, to reach for more. Secondly, if you're interested in medical and health writing, it's important to learn as much as you can about the different types, and particularly to narrow down on the specific types that you might be most interested in and most drawn to. That is essentially what I created the Future Medical Writer workshop for, is to help people get a little bit more exposure to the different types of medical and health writing, because the tendency is to think about medical and health writing as this like just broad, vague umbrella term that like anybody who's a medical writer is just a medical writer. And that's not really how medical and health writing are set up. There's lots of individual types, and there are a lot of differentiating factors between those types. And so I created that workshop so that people could learn more about those individual types, identify which 1 to 2 types they are most interested in and that are best suited to their goals and priorities, and then dive in on those specific types to start putting to practice some of the steps that are needed to move into that direction. So if you are someone who is very new to the concept of medical and health writing, doesn't really know much about it at all, maybe didn't even know that there were different types, don't know what the different types are, don't know what different types you might be most interested in, etc. Basically, someone who's very, very new to the space, a healthcare professional or student who's very, very new to the space. And that Future Medical Writer workshop is going to be something that is interesting for you. I'll put a link to it in the comments in case you want to learn more about it. But that's the second key takeaway, is that if you are interested in medical and health writing, learning as much as you can about the different types. And then third, to identify your own gaps in areas of improvement. So in the same way that I used my learning experiences at the CDC as opportunities to figure out what gaps I could help fill, you will want to identify your own gaps in areas of improvement. Where do your interests lie in medical and health writing, and where do you see gaps in areas of improvement? Where do you see communities that are not served through medical writing, health communications, health content? How can you use your skill sets to help fill those gaps and fill those opportunities? So hopefully sharing those reflections about my time at the CDC is helpful to you. Again, I'll drop the link for the Future Medical Workshop in the Future Medical Writer Workshop in the comments for this video. Also, for those of you who are 100% interested in health content writing specifically, meaning you kind of already have an idea about what the different types of medical and health writing are, and you know that health content writing specifically is what you are interested in that case, you can always comment waitlist to get on the waitlist for the next round of the Health Professionals to Health Writers program, which will be in July. So I will see you all next week after next, and feel free to drop some of your own key takeaways from the conversation.